I'll just start by saying I'm from ASIC, and for those that don't know what ASIC does, ASIC is the Financial Services and Corporate Regulator. Yes, it's corporate, but 1.9 million entities on our business register, or corporate register of small businesses. I'll talk about that in a minute. I do want to start by thanking the IPA and Deakin for asking ASIC to come along today. I'll talk about 4 key things apart from, I don't have a presentation, people can just watch me. No doubt I'll keep them enthused. I'll talk about 4 key things today. I'll talk about why small business is important to ASIC, and it is important that everybody understands that small businesses are important to ASIC. I'll talk about why we're here at the conference. I'll talk about why the regulation of small business is important. Yes, it is important. Peter may disagree, but no doubt we'll have a conversation about that. And I'll talk about what ASIC is actually doing to help protect and provide some tools to small business. But where do I sit within ASIC? I'm the Regional Commissioner for Queensland, which is a fancy title, but I'm also the Senior Executive Leader responsible for a small business compliance and deterrence team. Why is that important? 2 years ago, ASIC didn't have a team that was focused solely on small business. So I'll talk about how that's come to be. I'll also introduce 2 of my colleagues, Caitlin and Nicole, who sit over here. They do a lot of the hard grunt work insofar as being and speaking with small business owners. We talk about small business owners. We don't talk about directors or anything along those lines. And that's something that Peter taught us when he first came to speak to our team a couple of years ago. We do speak about small business as owners and in effect as consumers. And I think that's important. You'll understand how we try and protect them as consumers later on. So why is ASIC focused on small business, and why is small business important? It's ASIC's largest customer, pure and simple. We call small businesses a customer. Significant amount of revenue that comes into ASIC and then goes into the government coffers is derived directly from small businesses through their annual renewal fee, or tax as Peter likes to call it. Just on that point, what I will say is 2 years ago you wouldn't have had somebody from ASIC standing here in front of you being able to talk to you directly and talk about the fact that you may not like getting your small business, your annual renewal fee. So 2 years ago you didn't have somebody physically in front of you to show anything for your small business, for your fee. You've got something now, and I think that's very important. So there is 96% of ASIC's revenue is derived directly from small businesses, but still it hasn't answered the question as to why small business is important. ASIC undertakes an external stakeholder survey every 2 years. And in 2010, results of the external stakeholder survey showed that ASIC had absolutely no focus on small business. Significant population, significant revenue stream, but most of the work we did was focused at the large end of town. So basically, what we did is we looked at that data in detail, and we actually identified that there was an issue for ASIC, and we needed to actually get out and talk about the fact that ASIC had been doing a significant amount with small business. We just hadn't packaged it up, we hadn't communicated it, and we hadn't started to deliver it. So over the past 2 years, in effect, what we've done is we've redefined the work of my team to actually be ASIC's small business group. And Peter talked in his conversation about the journey of small business through Cosbo and a range of other entities over the last 5 years. And what I can tell you is that we're on a similar journey from ASIC's perspective. From a regulatory perspective, there are other regulators, the ACCC and the ATO, that we're leveraging on because they've been in this game a lot earlier. They've got a lot more advanced information and a lot more advanced programs, but we are leveraging off what they do. So why are we here? Why are we at this conference? Well, with 1.9 million small businesses, ASIC's got a population from an employee base of around 2,000. Put the numbers together, we just can't get out and speak to each person. So what we need to do is we need to use the organisations such as COSBOA, such as the IPA, to actually help get our message out. So we do see business advisors as a key conduit of information from ASIC out to small businesses. And what we often suggest, and Peter made mention in his speech about this as well, and I'll talk about some tools we're putting together, small businesses just don't have the time to understand what their obligations are. It doesn't matter about the fact of whether or not they want to comply, they just don't have the time. So if ASIC then starts putting information out that's 10, 12, 15 pages long, no one's going to read it. So what we understand is that we need to be out talking with the advisors who are going to be speaking to small business owners so that they've got a view as to what we want from small businesses. So in order to understand what ASIC does, we know that business advisors such as the IPA actually need to help get our message out. So I've talked about so far why small business is important. I've talked about why we're here at the conference. Let's talk about a fantastic question I'm sure Peter will very much agree with. Why regulation of small business is important. Small businesses need to operate within fair markets, black and white. What ASIC does is we identify those small businesses that operate outside of those fair markets and we take action. I'll talk about how we do that later on. Those that don't operate within the fair markets may have an unfair advantage when compared to other operators. So we think that that's very important. Laws actually that ASIC operate do actually protect small business owners. I know from other regulatory agencies they also protect them as well. And it's important to understand that in order for ASIC to actually set the benchmark of what it is and what is not a fair efficient market from one perspective, if we don't take law to punish those who do the wrong thing, then we can't help send a message to those that are doing the right thing. So regulation of small business is important because it helps set a fair playing field. It's important to understand that ASIC does take action when practices operate outside of that fair playing field. We do have a number of remedies available. We've got administrative, civil penalty and criminal. What does that mean from a small business perspective? It doesn't matter. If you've got ASIC knocking on the door, you probably also had a local government person knocking on the door, probably had the ATO. So the key here is what we're trying to do from a small business perspective is take the right regulatory action, most importantly, to increase compliance. And I'll talk about how we do that later. So one focus of the team is to help small businesses understand all the regulatory obligations. And I'll just show something up. I'll hold something up. 12 months ago or 2 years ago, there wasn't one clear book in ASIC that actually identified all of the obligations that a small business owner has. Now, this isn't the panacea. It's not going to change everything. 2 years ago, as a senior executive within ASIC, I couldn't stand up and say, this is what you've got to do to comply with your obligations. It's 6 or 7 or 8 pages. Somebody could sit down and read this 10 minutes. It's not going to help them understand what their obligations are, but 2 years ago, you wouldn't have even been able to point to what their obligations are. So that's one way that ASIC is actually helping identify that there is an issue with small business. So I've talked about why small business is important. I've talked about why we're at the conference. I've talked about why regulation of small business is important. But this just didn't happen overnight. So we've actually been on a journey for the last 2.5 years, nearly 3 years now. But did we just go out and decide that on the back of the 2010 stakeholder survey that we were going to set up a small business team? Did we just think that we'd go out and just do what we thought was relevant? The answer is absolutely not. And I mentioned, Peter made mention of Warren Mundy, the Productivity Commission's report on small business, on regulatory engagement with small business. Well, from 2010 through to 2013, every single time we've been out speaking at conferences such as this, the first thing we ask is what can we do better? And so I'd be keen to hear that. Obviously, business names is something. I'm all about the elephant in the room. Business names is something that ASIC didn't do as well as we would have liked to. But we've been out there, we've been talking about it, we've been taking a lot of feedback on board, and we're actually doing a lot better than we used to. So what else did we do to actually help form this small business team? We undertook an online survey in 2012. Why online? Because we could distribute it through as many associations as we wanted to. It took no longer than 15 minutes to complete. And why is that important? Because ASIC had never ever gone out specifically and asked small business what they wanted ASIC to do for them. But we'd never ever asked what frustrated small business about dealing with ASIC. We'd never ever asked whether or not our website needed to be enhanced, etc. So we went out in 2012 and sought feedback specifically from small business. And the key results from the survey were that we needed to do 3 things better. We needed to educate better. And I know that there's been conversation about education. We needed to provide some tools. We actually needed to provide some assistance. And believe it or not, people wanted us to actually take a big stick approach when it was appropriate to do so to get the bad eggs out of the market. So over the last 3 years, we've developed a framework, a small business framework within ASIC. It's a strategy that's focused on 3 key areas. Education. 2.5 years ago, we would never have been at a conference like this. We've spent a significant amount of time, money, and resources in going to at least 3 or 4 of these conferences every quarter. So we're actually physically getting out and speaking at conferences. Greg Tanzer, my commissioner, is speaking at another conference in Sydney tomorrow. I've got 2 people up actually manning a booth with the ACCC, the ATO, and another conference at the moment. We've got Nicole and Caitlin here, who are the face of our operations down here. So we attend conferences. Greg Medcraft, our chairman, is all about education. We cannot educate from behind the desk. So we're getting out and we're talking face to face. We're talking not only about what ASIC does, but we're also talking about what we can do better. And it's important for people to understand that a lot of small businesses don't actually know what ASIC does. You know, over the last 2 years, one question that I often raise first up is put your hand up if you know what ASIC does. And people put their hand up. And then I say, keep your hand up if you think we're a shoe company. A lot of people think that we're a shoe company, but we're not. So it's important to understand that in order for small businesses to understand what they need to do to comply with what the law says, they have to know what the regulator's about. So one key thing we're doing is we're educating. The second key thing we're doing as part of our small business strategy is we're assisting. Yes, we're assisting. Does that mean that if you get a late fee, we can waive that for you? The answer is no. But if you don't know who within ASIC you should go to, you can come to us and we'll facilitate for you. So you've got a door in now that you never ever had. As part of the survey in 2012, people said small business information on the ASIC website was non-existent. Absolutely fundamentally correct. Because everything on the ASIC website is about corporate. And there was never one single central repository of information that was focused on small business. So I'm pleased to say that at this point in time we're finalising an enhanced website from an ASIC perspective. There will be a single one way in, one way out from a small business perspective. Once again, it's not the panacea, but 2 years ago it wasn't there. And so what we're doing is we're making all the information easy to read. Our view is if people can't understand it in 5 minutes, they're not going to understand it if they go through it in more detail. To actually help us identify how the ASIC website needs to be enhanced, we've actually undertaken a significant amount of research overseas with some of the other regulators that have fantastically developed websites. And so we're looking at that website getting released on the 1st of November. So we're educating, we're assisting. We're also looking at putting together an app. Everything is app at this point in time. One key thing that we've identified over the last 2.5, 3 years is that if you're new into the small business game, then you may not know actually how to protect yourself from being scammed. Quite simply, there are a number of things that ASIC can do to help signpost for you the questions that you need to ask when you're entering into a contract for the first time. Once again, it won't stop you from signing on the piece of paper, but it might actually help point you in the right direction of actually helping understand what questions you should ask before you actually enter into a contract. So we're enhancing our website, we've released the booklet, and we're actually in the process of developing an app. So 3 things that we didn't have 2 years ago. And I have to keep saying, this is a journey for us. And the third part of our framework that people wanted us to do is that they did want us to regulate. They wanted us to regulate, but the key here is they wanted us to seek not to punish before we checked compliance. And as a regulator, it's important, if we talk about the regulatory pyramid, it's very important for us to understand that we need to be going out and telling people what the law says. We can't do that if we just flog people all the time. We need to be going out and testing compliance. So one thing that my team does is we go out around a whole range of key compliance areas and we help small businesses understand what their compliance obligations are. We do it at conferences, we will do it on the website, but we'll also do it through our surveillance activities. So where we do identify gaps in compliance, then what we do is we understand why from a systemic perspective, and we actually try and identify, are there any issues that we need to potentially feed back to our colleagues at Treasury, for example. Early stages yet, there's 1 or 2 that we've identified and we're just working through those. The important thing from an internal perspective is over the weekend I was actually looking at some work from one of our other stakeholder teams who actually identified that they're actually in the process of changing some forms, and I won't tell you what forms they are. But the key is they actually came to us and said, we want your feedback to see whether or not this is going to be a big or a little impact on small business. So one key thing that we said as part of that, and I'm sure Warren Mundy would be happy to hear this, is we said before you make any changes, you should go and consult with small business to see whether or not it is going to be an impost. So we're actually, where there are issues around compliance, we're trying to help people understand how to fix those issues. But we have identified from a compliance perspective and also from a small business as a consumer perspective that there's one huge gap in the, or one huge risk in the laws that ASIC administers, and that's in respect to illegal FedEx activity. Small businesses are often the people who suffer the most detriment on the back end of illegal FedEx activity. And for those who don't know what illegal FedEx activity is, it's when a director, use that word director, transfers the assets out of one company into another company, and the reason that they do so is to stop people who may actually be unsecured creditors. So, for example, small businesses who are owed monies, who they do it for the purpose of actually defrauding small businesses. So we've actually identified that there is a significant risk to small businesses, and PwC did a report in 2011 or 2012 that said that the average cost of illegal Phoenix activity in Australia is around $3.2 billion. And if you've got 96% of the regulated population being small businesses, then you can see who's going to be taking the most significant hit in that area, as well as employees. So what we're actually doing as part of that, the largest risk from a small business perspective at this point in time, is we've actually identified that there are roughly 2,500 directors who in the last 2 years have actually already fallen over 2 or more times. But they're still in the game, so they're still out there potentially doing illegal Phoenix activity and causing detriment to some small businesses. So what we're actually doing is we've actually identified 2,500, and we're actually going out and we're serving notices on them to get all their information. And the information that we're talking about is books and records. Now, a lot of these people won't have books and records. And if they don't have books and records, then how are you as an unsecured creditor going to actually be able to go after and try and get in the information? So what we're actually doing in that campaign is we're reminding directors of their obligations to raise the understanding. Where they don't comply with their obligations, then we'll be making sure that we take the right punitive or deterrent action to send a message to those that do the right thing. And then hopefully what we'll do is we'll hope that if they do decide to fall over early into external administration, they do it a lot earlier with a larger pot of the asset base still in existence. So in that area, that's one key area from a regulatory perspective where we are taking deterrence action, and we're working up for internal referrals for enforcement action at this point in time. So there are 4 key things that ASIC has been doing in respect of small business that we weren't doing 2 years ago. Are we there yet? The answer is absolutely not. Is it a journey for us? The answer is absolutely. I guess the key thing is that we know that we can do better. We do see small business as a very important customer for us, and we will continue to focus in this area. Thank you very much.